My name is Michelle Catherine Rodriguez. I'm 39 years old, and I'm a marriage counselor in Denver, Colorado. For 18 years, I've worked helping couples in crisis, but I myself went through a devastating divorce that nearly destroyed my life and my faith. I thought I understood everything about relationships until the day I died for 19 minutes, and Jesus revealed to me secrets about marriage that will transform your relationship forever. It was March 8th, 2024, ironically, International Women's Day. I was in my counseling office, seeing yet another couple on the brink of divorce. It was the fifth case, just that week. Sarah and Mark, married for 15 years, were looking at each other with hatred in their eyes. Words were like daggers, accusations flew back and forth, and I found myself reliving my own marital nightmare. You have to understand. My own marriage had ended 3 years earlier in the most painful way possible. My husband David and I had been married for 12 years when everything fell apart. We went from being madly in love to being complete strangers living in the same house. The arguments, the silent treatments, the emotional affairs, the financial stress, we experienced every marriage killer you can imagine. When our divorce was finalized, I was broken. How could I counsel other couples when I couldn't save my own marriage? I questioned everything I believed about love, commitment, and God's plan for relationships. I even considered leaving marriage counseling entirely because I felt like a fraud. But that day in March, as I watched Sarah and Mark destroying each other with words, I felt this overwhelming sadness, not just for them, but for the millions of marriages being destroyed by forces they didn't even understand. I had no idea I was about to discover that the real enemy of marriage isn't what most people think, and that Jesus had a plan to save relationships that would blow my mind. After that particularly brutal counseling session, I was driving home feeling completely drained. Sarah and Mark had scheduled their next appointment, but I could see they were already mentally divorced. They were just going through the motions. I stopped at a red light and suddenly felt this crushing weight on my chest. It wasn't just physical, it felt like the emotional pain of every broken marriage I'd witnessed was literally crushing my heart. The stress, the failure of my own marriage, the helplessness of watching love die over and over again. It all hit me at once. I managed to pull over before everything went black. A massive heart attack at 39 years old. The paramedics later said it was stress-induced cardiomyopathy. My heart literally broke from the emotional burden I'd been carrying. When they found me, I'd already been down for 7 minutes. At the hospital, they worked on me for another 12 minutes before getting my heart started. Total time dead, 19 minutes. But I wasn't dead. I was more alive than I'd ever been. Suddenly, I was floating above the emergency room, watching the medical team frantically working on my body. I could see my sister Maria rushing through the hospital corridors, my teenage daughter Emma crying in the waiting room. I wanted to comfort them, but they couldn't hear me. Then I felt this gentle pulling sensation, like I was being drawn upward through a tunnel of the most beautiful light I'd ever experienced. This light wasn't just illumination. It was pure love, the kind of love I'd been searching for my entire life, but had never found in any human relationship. When I emerged from that tunnel, I found myself in the most breathtaking place imaginable. It looked like a beautiful garden mixed with a grand palace, but everything was alive with light and love. And there, standing before me with eyes that held both infinite compassion and perfect understanding, was Jesus Christ. He wasn't like any picture I'd ever seen. Love radiated from him in waves that I could actually feel. When he looked at me, I felt completely known and completely accepted, the way I'd always wanted to feel in my marriage, but never had. "Michelle," he said, and his voice was like the most beautiful music I'd ever heard. "I brought you here because you need to understand what marriage really is and why so many are failing." Jesus gestured for me to walk with him through this heavenly garden. As we walked, he began showing me scenes that would forever change how I understood marriage and relationships. "Michelle," he said, "what you've been seeing in your counseling practice isn't the cause of marital problems, it's the symptoms. Let me show you what's really destroying marriages." Suddenly, we were looking down at Earth, and I could see millions of married couples in their homes. But what shocked me was that around almost every couple were these dark, shadowy figures, spiritual entities that I'd never noticed before. "These are spirits of division," Jesus explained. "They have been assigned to destroy the covenant of marriage because they know that strong marriages are the foundation of strong families, and strong families are the foundation of my kingdom on earth. I watched in horror as these dark beings whispered constantly into the ears of husbands and wives. I could hear their lies. He doesn't love you anymore. She doesn't respect you. You deserve better. You'd be happier alone. This marriage was a mistake. Every thought of divorce, every feeling of resentment, every impulse to cheat, Jesus revealed, is fed by these entities. They plant seeds of discord and then water them with circumstances that seem to prove their lies. Jesus then showed me how these spirits operated systematically. I saw how they attacked marriages through specific strategies. First, they attacked communication. I watched couples who used to talk for hours, suddenly finding nothing to say to each other. The spirits whispered different interpretations of the same conversation, causing misunderstandings and hurt feelings. Second, they attacked intimacy. I saw how these entities created emotional and physical distance between spouses. They magnified every flaw, highlighted every disappointment, and made couples feel like strangers to each other. Third, they attacked through comparison. Jesus showed me how social media had become a weapon against marriage. These spirits used carefully curated posts to make people feel their spouse and their life weren't good enough. Fourth, they attacked through finances. I watched how money stress was deliberately orchestrated to create conflict between couples. Arguments about spending, debt, and financial goals became weapons of mass destruction in relationships. Fifth, they attacked through in-laws and friends. Jesus showed me how these spirits influenced family members and friends to plant seeds of doubt about marriages. You could do better. He's not right for you. She's changed. But what broke my heart most was seeing how they attacked through unforgiveness. I watched decades-old hurts being constantly reopened and refreshed, preventing healing and creating permanent walls between spouses. Michelle, Jesus said sadly, most couples think they're fighting each other, but they're actually being manipulated by spiritual forces they can't see. They're not enemies, they're allies under attack. Then Jesus showed me something that made me understand why my own marriage had failed. I saw how David and I had unknowingly given these spirits legal access to our relationship through compromise, unforgiveness, and turning away from God's design for marriage. I watched our wedding day from a spiritual perspective. We had been surrounded by light and love, but as we gradually stopped praying together, stopped putting God first, and started following cultural ideas about marriage instead of biblical ones, dark clouds began forming over our relationship. Every marriage starts with my blessing, Jesus explained. But couples must actively maintain their spiritual protection through prayer, forgiveness, and following my design for relationships. Jesus then revealed the most heartbreaking truth. Michelle, your marriage didn't have to end. David's heart is still broken too. The enemy convinced you both that divorce was the solution, but it was never necessary. I started crying, realizing that everything I'd believed about my failed marriage was wrong. We hadn't been incompatible. We'd been under spiritual attack and didn't know how to fight back. But Jesus, I asked through my tears, if marriages are under spiritual attack, how can any of them survive? What's the secret to making marriage work? His eyes filled with joy. Michelle, I'm going to show you how marriage was designed to work and give you the keys that can save any relationship, even ones that seem hopeless. Suddenly, we were watching couples whose marriages were thriving despite facing the same challenges that destroyed others. These couples had something different, a spiritual light surrounding their relationships that the dark entities couldn't penetrate. The secret, Jesus said, is understanding that marriage isn't just a human contract, it's a spiritual covenant that reflects my relationship with the church. When couples understand this, they become unstoppable. Jesus then revealed the first key. Marriage is a three-chord strand, husband, wife, and me. When I'm at the center, the marriage becomes spiritually unbreakable. I watched couples who prayed together daily, and their relationships had supernatural strength. When conflicts arose, instead of attacking each other, they recognized spiritual warfare and prayed against it together. The second key was understanding roles and order. I designed marriage with specific roles, not to create hierarchy, but to create harmony. Jesus explained, when husbands love sacrificially, like I love the church, and wives respond with respect and support, marriages become powerful spiritual forces. I saw couples who had embraced these roles experiencing unprecedented unity and purpose. The husband's sacrificial love created safety for the wife to flourish, and her respect and support empowered him to lead with confidence. The third key was the power of covenant thinking versus contract thinking. Contracts are about what you get, Jesus said. Covenants are about what you give. When both spouses focus on giving rather than getting, love multiplies exponentially. I watched couples who had learned to serve each other selflessly, and their love had actually grown stronger over decades instead of weaker. The fourth key was spiritual warfare as a team. Jesus showed me couples who had learned to fight against the real enemy, the spiritual forces trying to divide them, instead of fighting each other. When couples recognize that their spouse isn't the enemy, they become allies in spiritual warfare, Jesus explained. Their combined prayers and unity create spiritual authority that breaks every attack against their marriage. The fifth key was the power of forgiveness. I watched couples who had learned to forgive quickly and completely, and their relationships were free from the poison of bitterness that destroyed so many others. Forgiveness isn't just a one-time decision, Jesus revealed. It's a daily choice that keeps love flowing and prevents spiritual toxins from accumulating. The sixth key was understanding that marriage is training for eternity. I use marriage to prepare my people for eternal relationship with me, Jesus explained. Every challenge is an opportunity to grow in love, patience, and character. I saw couples who viewed their difficulties as opportunities to become more like Christ, and their marriages had produced not just happiness, but holiness and deep spiritual maturity. Michelle, Jesus said, these aren't just good ideas, they're spiritual laws. When couples follow my design, their marriages become supernatural testimonies of my love. But Jesus, I said, what about marriages that are already broken? What about couples who have hurt each other deeply? What about situations like mine, where it seems too late? His smile was gentle but confident. Michelle, I specialize in resurrections. No marriage is beyond my ability to restore, but couples must be willing to follow my process. Suddenly, I was witnessing the most beautiful transformations. I saw couples who had been on the brink of divorce experiencing complete restoration through specific steps Jesus revealed to me. First, Jesus said, there must be genuine repentance. Not just saying sorry, but truly understanding how their actions grieved me and hurt their spouse. I watched a husband who had been having an emotional affair break down in genuine repentance, not just for getting caught, but for betraying the sacred covenant he'd made. His wife, who had been completely closed off, began to soften as she witnessed his authentic brokenness. Second, there must be spiritual cleansing. Couples must renounce any spiritual agreements they've made that gave the enemy access to their marriage. Jesus showed me couples who had participated in counseling that promoted divorce, who had entertained thoughts of affairs, or who had spoken curses over their relationships. As they repented and renounced these spiritual openings, I could see dark entities literally being forced to leave their homes. Third, they must invite me back to the center of their marriage through daily prayer and worship together. I watched couples who had started each day praying together, and the spiritual atmosphere in their homes completely transformed. The attacks on their marriage weakened dramatically because they were constantly reinforcing their spiritual protection. Fourth, they must learn to fight the real enemy together instead of fighting each other. Jesus showed me a couple who had been arguing constantly until they learned to recognize spiritual manipulation. Instead of attacking each other when conflict arose, they would pray together against the spirits trying to divide them. Their arguments decreased by 90% within weeks. Fifth, they must rebuild trust through consistent covenant actions rather than just words. I watched a wife who had lost all trust in her unfaithful husband slowly begin to believe in him again as he demonstrated through daily actions that he was committed to the covenant, not just the convenience of marriage. Sixth, they must learn to love supernaturally rather than just naturally. Jesus revealed how he could give couples his own love for their spouse when their human love ran out. I saw couples who had fallen out of love experiencing supernatural love that was stronger than their original feelings. Seventh, they must understand that restoration is a process, not an event. I watched couples working through deep hurt with patience and commitment, understanding that healing takes time, but that every day of obedience to God's design brought them closer to complete restoration. But then Jesus showed me something that made me weep with joy. He revealed that not only could broken marriages be restored, but they could become stronger than marriages that had never been tested. Couples who experience my restoration develop supernatural marriage tools, Jesus explained. They become unstoppable forces for my kingdom because they've learned to fight spiritual battles and win. I saw restored couples mentoring other struggling marriages with authority and power because they had personal experience with God's restoration power. Michelle, Jesus said, I want to use your story, both your divorce and what you're learning now, to help save millions of marriages. Your greatest failure can become your greatest ministry. He then showed me couples I would counsel in the future using these revelations, and I watched marriage after marriage being saved through the principles he was teaching me. But first, Jesus said with a knowing smile, there's someone who needs to hear this message from you personally. Suddenly, I saw David, my ex-husband, and I could see that he was just as broken and regretful as I was. Jesus was showing me that restoration was possible, even for us if we were both willing to follow his process. As our time together was ending, Jesus' expression became more urgent. Michelle, what I'm about to show you is why this message about marriage cannot wait. Suddenly, I was seeing into the near future, and what I witnessed about the state of marriage made my spirit grieve. I saw the institution of marriage under the most coordinated attack in human history. The spiritual forces destroying individual relationships were scaling up to destroy the very concept of biblical marriage in society. The enemy knows that strong marriages create strong families, and strong families create strong nations that honor me, Jesus explained. His goal is to eliminate biblical marriage entirely. I watched as laws were being passed that redefined marriage beyond recognition. I saw children being taught in schools that marriage was an outdated institution. I witnessed social media algorithms specifically designed to make married people dissatisfied with their relationships. The window for saving marriage as I designed it is closing rapidly, Jesus warned. If my people don't learn these truths and start demonstrating supernatural marriages, the next generation won't even understand what covenant love looks like. But what broke my heart most was seeing how many Christian marriages were failing at the same rate as secular ones, because believers had adopted cultural ideas about relationships instead of following God's design. Many of my people have beautiful wedding ceremonies in churches, Jesus said sadly, but then they follow the world's advice for their actual marriages. They're trying to build supernatural relationships with natural wisdom. Then Jesus showed me the impact of failed marriages on children, and I wept. I saw kids from broken homes struggling with their ability to trust, to commit, to believe in love. The generational damage was staggering. Every marriage that fails according to my design, instead of being restored, affects not just two people, but generations of descendants, Jesus revealed. But then he showed me the flip side. Marriages that were restored and strengthened through these principles were producing children who had supernatural understanding of love, commitment, and spiritual authority. Michelle, Jesus said, placing his hands on my shoulders, I'm sending you back to warn my people that their marriages are under spiritual attack, but also to show them that I have given them everything they need not just to survive, but to thrive. I felt overwhelmed by the responsibility. Jesus, will people believe this? Will they be willing to change? Some will, he said gently, and those marriages will become testimonies that demonstrate my power to a watching world. They'll help save millions of other relationships. Suddenly, I felt myself being pulled back through that tunnel of light. As much as I wanted to stay in that place of perfect love, I knew I had a crucial mission to complete. The next thing I knew, I was gasping for air in a hospital bed, surrounded by medical staff who looked absolutely stunned. My sister Maria was crying with relief, and my daughter Emma was holding my hand tightly. The cardiac team couldn't explain what had happened. After 19 minutes without a heartbeat, I should have had severe brain damage. Instead, every test came back completely normal. The cardiologist called it medically inexplicable, but I knew exactly what had happened. Jesus had brought me back because marriages needed to hear this message urgently. The first thing I did when I was stable enough was call David. For the first time in 3 years, we had a real conversation. I told him everything Jesus had shown me about our marriage, about the spiritual attacks we'd never recognized, about the restoration that was possible. He broke down crying. Michelle, I've been so broken since our divorce. I know I made mistakes, but I never stopped loving you. I just didn't know how to fight for us. Within weeks, we began counseling together. Not for reconciliation necessarily, but for understanding and forgiveness. As we applied the principles Jesus had shown me, something miraculous began happening. The love we thought was dead started coming back to life. 6 months later, we remarried in a small ceremony with Emma and our closest family. But this time, we built our marriage on Jesus's design, rather than cultural expectations. The transformation has been supernatural. We're not just back together, we're better than we ever were before, because now we understand how to fight the real enemy and protect our covenant. That was 14 months ago, and my entire approach to marriage counseling has been revolutionized. I'm not just helping couples communicate better. I'm teaching them spiritual warfare for their relationships. David and I now counsel couples together, and we've seen miraculous transformations. Marriages that seemed hopeless have been completely restored through the principles Jesus revealed to me. Our daughter Emma has watched this entire journey, and she now has a supernatural understanding of what covenant love looks like. She's not afraid of marriage like so many young people. She's excited about finding someone to build a God-centered relationship with. But here's what grieves my heart. I've shared these revelations with hundreds of couples, and while some have experienced complete transformation, others dismiss spiritual warfare as too weird, or think they can save their marriages through human wisdom alone. If you're watching this video and your marriage is struggling, it's not by accident. Jesus is trying to show you that your relationship is under spiritual attack. But He's also given you everything you need to win this battle. Here's what I want you to do right now. First, recognize that your spouse isn't your enemy. Spiritual forces trying to divide you are the real enemy. Second, invite Jesus back to the center of your marriage through daily prayer together. Third, repent for any ways you've given spiritual access to your relationship through unforgiveness, compromise, or following worldly advice. Fourth, learn to fight spiritual battles together instead of fighting each other. Fifth, commit to following God's design for marriage rather than cultural expectations. Sixth, if your marriage has already ended, understand that restoration is still possible if both parties are willing to follow God's process. Seventh, connect with other couples who understand spiritual warfare for marriage and can support your journey. Your marriage doesn't have to be another divorce statistic. The same Jesus who raised Lazarus from the dead can resurrect your dead relationship if you're willing to follow His design. The choice is yours, but choose quickly. As Jesus showed me, the attacks on marriage are intensifying, and couples who don't learn to fight spiritually will become casualties in a war they don't even know they're in. My name is Michelle Catherine Rodriguez. I died for 19 minutes, and Jesus sent me back to show couples how to save their marriages through spiritual warfare and God's supernatural design for relationships. The question is, will you fight for your marriage with the weapons Jesus has given you?